All right, I think we are about ready to begin. I want to say good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. I want to thank everybody who's coming out. We have another great turnout for our latest webinar in the NIMBL lecture series. This one is The Path to a Better SAP UX Begins with User Analytics. I'm Jake Eisbart, part of the NIMBL marketing team. A little bit about us at NIMBL. We are SAP technologists and SAP ecosystem thought leaders. Our consulting business, which is 50% of our work, delivers SAP products, both technical and functional, while our Denver-based business, SAP Managed Services, the other 50%, supports both Fortune 1000 and Midmarket 24/7 across 20-plus SAP skill sets. While our projects tend to be technical in nature, HANA, UX, SOLMAN, we likewise provide deliverable-based SAP functional business processes and PMO services. Here's a quick list of some of the services that we offer and support. Obviously, today we'll be talking about user experience and user analytics. And here are a couple of the customers that we work with and currently work with. Just a couple of housekeeping items, We want to be able to answer as many questions as possible. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you will see a chat box. Feel free to type in any questions that you have or any comments, and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And before we start, we'd like to just put out a poll question just so we can get a gauge of the audience that we have right now. The first question that we're going to ask is, have you started down the path to S/4HANA solutions and or Fiori-based applications? Is that a yes, a no, I'm not sure, or it is currently on your roadmap for 2016? And we'll give you a couple seconds to answer that question. All right, people are filling in the questions. Okay, that's great. So let's start up with the path to a better SAP UX begins with user analytics. And today we're actually fortunate enough to have two speakers, Jesse Burnell and Bogdan Nika. Jesse, who's now with SAP, was formerly the Vice President of Global Shared Services at Knoa Software, managing both the pre-sales engineer team as well as the services and supports team at Knoa. And prior to Knoa, he architected and deployed the Knoa technology to drive improvements to SAP business processes in a manufacturing environment. Today, Jesse is the Senior Business Development Specialist at SAP, focusing on SAP education. He's also recognized as a thought leader in the UEM space and regularly participates at ASUG and industry-specific events. Bogdan Nika has over 15 years of experience in product design and development. He's worked with Knoa for the past 12 years in multiple roles, from web app developer and lead product designer in the early startup days to senior product manager today. And he's been intimately involved in the evolution of the Knoa platform and its applications. And we're going to give you one more poll question before we start. And that is, again, just to get a feel for the crowd. Are you familiar with design thinking concepts and how to apply them to your organization's Fiori plans? Is that a yes, a no, I'm not sure, and what is this design thinking you speak of? All right. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse Burnell. Jesse, go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. So we're just waiting for the results to come back here, and then we'll show those here on the screen. So let's see what the results are. So this is kind of what I expected. So some of you are familiar with the design thinking concepts as well as what they'll be used for. And then we'll be talking about that as we go forward. So on to design thinking. So when you look at design thinking for business innovation, some of you probably are familiar with Six Sigma. So it's very similar to a Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma methodology approach. So Hasso Plattner with the Hasso Plattner Institute at SAP has applied design thinking concepts to the way people learn within his organization. So one of the things that we find pretty interesting as we take customers through these paths, this process, is really coming up with innovation and how to very quickly understand your user community, what the users are doing, and really what needs to be innovated, what's the true need of that user as you go through this process. So really design thinking is all about understanding that user and moving them forward down this path for a better user experience. Looking at some of the items on this slide, one of the ones that I like to point out the most is empathy. So a lot of times when you go through a process of looking at data and trying to decide what the right thing is to do when you're prototyping, when you're building a solution, especially as a developer or someone who's designing new screens, new visualizations, a lot of times we don't focus on the empathy of the user. So when we think about empathy, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is a lot of times what the user truly needs is not what they're asking for. So with design thinking, the concepts that you go through, it really helps you brainstorm, go through the process, and truly understand what the real issues are, what the real problems are, so that you're solving the issues to make the end user's experience better in the system. With Fiori, that's really the whole process and the whole concept of where we're trying to go with Fiori visualization. So looking at the process, so really the process, pretty easy. I'm going to go over high level. There are workshops that are offered. So I know NIMBL Consulting comes in and does design thinking workshops. I know they would be more than willing to come in and do that. SAP does the same thing. I've done many of these design thinking workshops with customers. I think some customers are on the phone that will be doing design thinking concept workshops here in the next week or so, where we'll be going through this together. But really the steps that you're going through, very similar to methodology, like I said, with Six Sigma or other methodologies that you may have seen in the past. So again, it's a process, and what we're trying to make you understand is that with user experience, with moving down this path, it's going to be a process. It's not a once and done. So you can't just go through and say, I'm going to change everything to Fiori and I'm going to be done in 60 days and I'm going to move on. I'm not going to have anything else to worry about. It's a process that you continue to go through, and you constantly are making improvements. It's about the multidisciplinary teams. So when you go through these concepts in this methodology, you want to make sure you have many different people in the room when you start going through the design space. So you want people from the business, from IT, from the end user. You want a gamut of people in the room so that you really start to pull in and understand what is the problems that we're trying to focus on. So looking at user experience management, or as known in SAP UEM, user experience management, what we see here with data, and really what UEM is all about, it's all about the data and what data can provide to help you down your Fiori path, your S4HANA path. We have customers using this to validate, should they move to Simple Finance or S4 Finance? Should I be investing in other solutions? So having this data that you can get from UEM can really help drive decisions down a path of investment, as well as drive decisions down the path of where do I start, what screens do I start on, why would I even start with this or invest in this new solution. So makes perfect sense. So when you're getting started on this SAP Fiori path, data is definitely important. And again, linking this to design thinking, very quickly as you go through design thinking, there's a lot of places where you need data. And instead of sitting next to the user and doing a stopwatch activity, or sitting over their shoulder watching what they're doing, trying to identify what their problems are, having a tool to give you that data set is important. And I think where we see success with some customers is them using the data from UEM and really helping drive through this process. So what I'm going to go through now is really the 3 steps of what we go through when you're preparing for this migration. So step 1, again, collecting the data in your current environment. So really assessing the challenges from today, really establishing what the user success criteria is. So having data points before you start. So many people start down the Fiori path, the S4 path, the HANA path. Some of you have migrated. Some of you, I'm sure, are already on HANA. Some of you have already moved to some of the S4 solutions. And I'm sure from an IT organization, there's struggles, right, with ROI. And I'm sure there's a lot of IT organizations with people on the phone today that say, I moved to HANA, but I'm not sure it's actually made the improvement that I thought it would make. I've moved to Fiori, and I think it's better, but I'm not sure if it's being adopted, or I'm not sure if it's really making the life for the user better or not better. There's a lot of those questions that come up. So starting with data and setting those stakes in the ground. What am I going to measure? What is important? What do I call adoption? How do I make sure we're succeeding? Having that baseline and having the data on step 1 is critical to show success when you make it to the end. Going to step 2, So now when we go through step 2, what you're going to see is evaluating profiles for SAP. So whether it's screen personas, Fiori, UI5, we really want to focus on, when you think about design thinking, the personas that you look at with design thinking. And what a persona means within design thinking is someone who is doing the role or who you're trying to solve the problem for. So when you think about, am I trying to solve my UI improvement or my UX improvement? Am I trying to make my user experience better for the user who's physically in front of the machine? Or am I trying to make my user experience better for cost out for a CIO? So if it's a CIO persona you're trying to solve the issue for, the answer may be different than if it's the user experience for the person sitting in front of the computer. So really when we look at design implementation, uncovering issues, again, the data along this journey where I had a baseline, now I'm going to start using the data to, when I'm prototyping, understanding what people are doing, and I'm evaluating what users are seeing, I want to understand, are they actually seeing benefit from what we're putting into place? And then when we look at step 3, identifying adoption gaps, one of the key things with UEM is it solves a very critical problem that most companies have. If you've moved to Fiori, some of you will have seen this issue already. You start to lose some of the user data that you had from your transactional code or T-code base applications. So if you think about ECC and T-codes and how those T-codes are reported to the SU transactions or within basis, when you go down the Fiori path, you start to go more screen-driven, UI5, right, that more UI5 GUI-based view and look feel. What happens is you lose some user data. So what UEM starts to solve for you is you still have that capability of monitoring those same analytics when you move to Fiori, just as you were when you had T-codes. So if you haven't started to, or if you already are down this path and have a gap, UEM is definitely being used in this space to ensure adoption. So using UEM to monitor Fiori on what device are people using, how is the screen interacting for the users, where are the errors occurring, what's the true idle and active time. These are some things that Bogdan's going to share here in a minute, and we'll go into some of the specific analytics. But it's really about understanding, is this a success or is this not a success, and keeping the emotion out of the conversation. So with data, you can stay away from the emotional conversations, and you can continue to drive down the path of let data tell the story. So definitely important in the UEM space. So again, I'm going to remind as we go to this next question, but you can type in questions if you have them in the chat window. So feel free to type in questions. I am going to hand it over to Bogdan here in a second. So next question, does your organization leverage visual analytics tool? If so, which one? So as you see here, obviously SAP's product Lumira, and you see Tableau, Concur, SAP Business Objects, lots of things that you can visualize data in. Do you use a specific visualization tool? And if so, which one are you visualizing in? All right. Looks like we have people responding, so I'm going to go ahead and say skip to results so we can see the results. So as you can see here, business objects, not a surprise that that's where a lot of you are, especially in the SAP space. What you'll see with UEM, we do leverage business objects. We're going to show some of the data today in Tableau. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bogdan. We'll go to Bogdan's introduction slide. So Bogdan, off to you for your section.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. So let's consider some concrete examples of how user analytics can help with the Fiori project. For this, we will look at every stage of a typical project before developing the new Fiori apps, during the design process, and after those apps are deployed into the field. So for the first example, we will look at how you can identify SAP transactions that should be targeted to be mobilized through Fiori. For the second example, we'll look briefly at how you can identify the UX pain points that should be addressed by your new Fiori designs. And finally, for the last example, we'll look at how you can monitor the user adoption for the new Fiori apps once they have been deployed to your business users. So starting with the first example, the goal here is to mobilize certain SAP transactions by developing new Fiori applications. For this, we want to be able to identify those transactions that are most frequently accessed by our mobile workforce, specifically over VPN. So this view gives you the transaction usage patterns based on how those transactions are accessed from inside the corporate network or over VPN. At the top of the view, you can see a summary of how many transactions are accessed over VPN and also how many users access these transactions, especially compared to the transactions and users who primarily are active from inside the network. At the bottom of the view, you also have a list of specific transactions and individual users, again, with the focus being those coming in through VPN. So based on this information, you can select the prime candidates for a mobile experience, not only in terms of the SAP transactions that should be converted to a Fiori application, but also the users who will benefit the most from that experience. Moving on to the second example, here, throughout a typical design thinking process, which was described briefly by Jesse, the goal of designing a new Fiori application is to streamline the user interactions with the system when trying to accomplish a certain task. Specifically, we want the new Fiori applications to address all known UX pain points with the current process and applications. Now, that assumes that we know what those current pain points are. And that's exactly where user analytics come into play. Typically, that exercise is done by interviewing users or watching over their shoulder. A better approach would be to leverage the user analytics across all business users that fit a certain profile, looking at and analyzing all their production workflows to get an accurate and complete picture of existing pain points. So this view helps you do just that. It ranks the SAP transactions, as you can see at the top, based on a number of KPIs, such as screen complexity, user engagement, and error rates. We can view a similar ranking for individual users at the bottom of the screen. This will help us first understand which pain points we're trying to solve. Secondly, how users will benefit from an improved Fiori design. And finally, you can also use this to validate that those new Fiori designs are indeed addressing all the known pain points. And finally, for the last example, we want to track the user adoption of the new Fiori apps that we designed, developed, and deployed to the field. Are the new designs hitting the mark with our users? Are the users getting a better experience? Are they adopting the new apps? The way you answer that is with a view which shows you the usage patterns across all the Fiori applications that you deployed and all your target business users. So with this view, you can track user adoption, various user adoption metrics for each Fiori application. Those metrics include the number of active users that are interacting with each Fiori application on a regular basis, as well as the amount of active time that they spend on the application. We can easily identify the applications with good adoption, either in terms of number of engaged users or level of engagement, level of activity, as well as those with poor adoption, and it gives us a target for improvement. We can also see the activity trends on the right side of the screen for a specific application, and granular usage patterns down to the screen level. The heat map at the bottom of the screen shows you on a Fiori by application basis the level of user interaction at the screen level. So these were just some of the examples. There are others as well. but this one illustrates some of the typical scenarios in which throughout a Fiori migration project, you would use user analytics to leverage the information towards a better design, development, and then enhancements and maintenance of your Fiori apps. And with that, I will pass it back to Jake.
All right, so you saw the poll question that came up. On which of the following would you like to be sent additional information? Obviously, we touched a little bit on Fiori and some S/4HANA design thinking and UX strategy. And we'll give people a couple seconds to fill that out. And just to expand a little bit more, I'm going to hand it back to Jesse Burnell.
Perfect. So Bogdan, while you're still there, if you can unmute your phone, I'm gonna ask you a few questions. So some of the things, Bogdan, I know you've had a chance to go to some Fiori design workshops with SAP where you've actually done some Fiori creation yourself. Can you kind of share with the audience on the phone today some of the places where you feel UEM fills a gap in that Fiori space? I know we've talked about some of this internally, but I don't think everyone is aware of those key spaces where UEM can start to solve some key issues that they may find after they move down this Fiori path.
Sure. So there are a number of different places, and perhaps the first one to mention is the design thinking process itself, which is the kind of key. It's key for rolling out Fiori apps which are addressing known challenges that business users have today with the current applications. So that process typically entails the construction of an abstract user profile known as a persona. That persona basically encapsulates a user profile, and those users are responsible for performing a certain set of tasks. When the Fiori design team, together with the development team, interview typically super users to come up with a good definition of this profile, they have to make a number of assumptions about how that particular person needs to accomplish their task, what the flow of the process should look like, and what are the key pain points that they're trying to address. So throughout the entire process, there are a lot of assumptions being made. And you don't really get to test those assumptions until you have developed a prototype, or perhaps even you have the final application. You deploy it to your, let's say, small set of pilot users, and then you start getting feedback from those users. So one way to both accelerate and improve that design process to come up with the best application that addresses your users' needs is to truly look at build a profile that's based on the experiences of all your targets, just a handful of super users. So interviewing users is okay, but it doesn't give you a complete picture of what the actual user experience is. And that's where I see user analytics playing a key role. It gives you visibility into the complete experience across your entire user base, so you understand what type of error conditions they encounter today, what's their typical experience in the process today, what are the issues that you're trying to solve. And what you will find is that there are a lot of issues that you may not discover just by interviewing a small sample of users. And certainly that's a better way to validate your assumptions that you're making throughout the design process, as opposed to waiting several weeks or months down the road to discover that you missed to account for a certain key factor. So you can accelerate that entire process by leveraging the analytics, leveraging the data, looking at the actual workflows that users are performing today in the current system, and using that to inform your designs.
Perfect. So just to add on to some of the things that Bogdan's saying around design thinking, and again, it's one of these processes as you go through and you do this workshop internally, it definitely starts to expose some of these areas and really gets your mind and the creativity going to really start to think about how you would solve some of these issues. I want to go back to some of the data that we were showing with Bogdan, and I think some of the key areas that some people often fail when they go down this Fiori path is they don't necessarily focus on the roles or when we talked about personas a little bit, so the role that people are playing within a company, and am I moving everything to Fiori? So what I've seen working with customers now these last couple of years in this space, where we see some failure is people try the Fiori, they try S4HANA, and with Fiori they try in a specific area, and I'm going to say procurement because a lot of people go down the procurement path first, but they change things for only certain processes or features and functions. And where we see failure is if you don't change the entire job of their role. So if everything that person is doing is not moved to Fiori, your users will go back to ECC, or they'll go back to the way that they used to use SAP. And the reason being is they go to Fiori to do a function, then they go back to ECC to do a function, then they go back to Fiori to do a function. Eventually the user's just going to say, ECC is fine. Even though I don't like it, I'm just going to stay there. So with some of this data that you're seeing here on the screen, with users and roles and T-codes, you can start to make sure that when you're thinking about complexity and cost, unique screens, what you see there, so you see unique users, unique screens, the unique screens can start to show complexity. So if I have a T-code, and you can see ME23N, which is a display T-code, you might see lots of screens that people are going to an ME23N, probably across lots of different roles, may not be the first one to move into your Fiori world. So what you're looking for from a cost impact perspective is try to keep it simple, try to impact an entire user base for everything that they do in their job. So using this data to even start to go, I want to look at unique screens where they're under 20 or maybe under 10, and I want to see where job roles are impacted by anything under 10, and that's the only places where they're going within SAP. Those are really good places to definitely from a user experience or a UI owner to make some impact, where I'm going to go design some screens, move down this path, and probably see a better success rate than if you try to move very complex but only part of their job. So again, just some more key points there on the data. So I'm gonna go into some of the questions that I know were asked. So one of the questions that I have that came up, Bogdan, was what data does Fiori collect, or what does UEM collect on Fiori? So I moved to Fiori, now I have a Fiori app created. What type of data would I expect to see from UEM?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of using UEM before and after a Fiori project is the fact that you're getting exactly the same user analytics irrespective of what SAP system you're monitoring, whether it's a legacy system like SAP GUI or it's an SAP UI5 system like Fiori or any other S4HANA application for that matter. So that includes three key metrics that we work with. Errors that are displayed to the user. These are basically work interactions that inhibit and affect user productivity. We're talking about activity patterns down to the screen level. So just like in SAP GUI, we would measure the active time that people spend on every SAP transaction and every SAP screen. You're getting exactly the same metrics when it comes to Fiori apps. So like we showed in the last example, when it comes to tracking adoption for the new Fiori apps, not only can you understand the user activity at the application level, but also down to the screen level. And the third key metric is performance, right? So if one of the key objectives was to streamline the performance, improve the performance of the system by developing new Fiori apps, then you have the ability to measure the performance before and after, looking at the response time, how quickly is the system responding to the user. So with those three key metrics, you can basically benchmark performance as you move between the legacy applications and the new Fiori applications.
Perfect. So another question. So with other tools that SAP has in the solution manager space, so very often people go to a Fiori class and they learn about other monitoring tools. What's the difference in your mind from EEMON versus UEM data?
Well, one fundamental difference is the way about what's being measured. So with EEMON, you're basically probing the system. You're testing for availability. You have to send out scripts that would, in essence, give you a sample of the performance of the system. With UEM, you're basically creating complete visibility across your entire ecosystem, across all your users, production users, across all their workflows in the application. So in one case, you're kind of approaching it from a very IT-centric perspective and sampling the performance and availability of the system. With UEM, you're looking for higher level user analytics where you're after user productivity, you're after uncovering training needs, looking at adoption, the kind of things that you really can get with the EEM tool.
Perfect. So another thing that I want to mention, so very often when I'm with customers, I hear people talk about X-ray, and X-ray from a Fiori X-ray, and there's different X-ray tools. So there are some tools that do UEM measuring that are called X-ray, but there's also a SAP X-ray tool as well. And what X-ray is, and some of you may know, some of you may not know, but X-ray allows you to enter some messages in the Fiori app itself. So if you think about a developer, and some of you may have developed some Fiori apps, and you may use X-ray to enter some of your key messages. But what we see there is some people confuse X-ray with a user tool, help users, error message type tool. And really what it's there for is to allow for, if you think about ECC, when you click on an error message and you get a line of information at the bottom of the screen, and it will say things like check all data before you hit save, or make sure the date is current and not in the past, things like that you would expect to see in SAP. X-ray is similar, where you can put in those key messages to either guide a user through a process or give them a warning or issue that through a Fiori screen. Some of the integrations there, WPB has a direct, or Workforce Performance Builder has a direct integration into X-ray and allows that information to show up on the screen. But it's definitely something that is different. So it's not the same. It's not a user analytics tool. It's something to help guide the users through, but it's more around errors and issues to be notified or pushed to the user in the actual Fiori screen itself. So I'm just going to look at some of the other questions here. So one of the things that I think are confusing to some people, and maybe all of you on the phone know this, but so if you can high level, Bogdan, go through what's the difference. So often people will say Fiori and HANA. So when I'm talking about building my new UI user experience, am I focused on Fiori, or am I focused on HANA, or am I focused on both? Can you just kind of go through a high level what your thoughts are between Fiori versus HANA?
Sure. And the customers that we work with who have started down this path, there is a good mix between people who are primarily focused on HANA, so replacing the database platform to be able to drive, let's say, performance improvements, versus customers who are primarily focused on Fiori as a user experience initiative, where they want to streamline the user interactions with the system. And obviously, both are benefits that you can derive from moving to an S/4HANA system from R3. And it really depends on what your overall business priorities are. And there's no good or bad strategy to take. But in essence, most customers will typically find themselves for a while in a mixed environment where perhaps they have a pilot project where they are not quite ready to make the investment for HANA because that's a very complex project and you basically have to revamp your entire infrastructure. But they do want to try out some of the Fiori applications, whether they come out of the box from SAP or whether they want to build them on their own, just to be able to deliver a better experience to their users. And this could be driven by a project to mobilize certain applications or move a group of users entirely to Fiori. Whatever the underlying reason is, they are not quite ready to invest in HANA, but the technology gives you the ability to use the new Fiori technology with the legacy with your legacy infrastructure. So there are a number of Fiori applications that you can develop which will work with your legacy database system. You're not going to see the performance improvements and scalability improvements that you would see with HANA, but your users will get a better streamlined experience from an UX perspective.